It might sound like an odd statement, but the relationship between the news and what I like to think of as real people has shifted somewhat throughout the years.
Over to the newsroom.
Not so long ago, the news basically consisted of a bloke at a desk telling you, the viewer, what had happened that day, with the help of some reporters, some cheap graphics, and an irritating weatherman. Real people, i.e. us common or garden shoe-wearing schlubs, didn't get much of a look in, except, of course, if we'd witnessed something important.
She told me what happened after the first explosion.
And the second bomb didn't go off for a good 10 minutes after that.
But in the late 70s and early 80s, this began to change and real people started to have more input. The concept of the public having their say hit a peak in 1983 when housewife Diane Gould famously put the boot into Mrs Thatcher live on Nationwide's On the Spot segment.
Mrs Thatcher, why, when the Belgrano, the Argentinian battleship, was outside the exclusion zone and actually sailing away from the Falklands, why did you give the orders to sink it?
But it was not sailing away from the Falklands. It was in an area which was a danger to our ships.
Mrs Thatcher, I am saying that nobody with any imagination can put it sailing other than away from the Falklands.
Mrs. I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
It's Mrs Comeuppance.
It was in an area which was a danger to our ships.
Well,
now, you accept that, do you?
No.
It was proof that real people's questioning of the facts could move the story forward for the journalists, so from this point on their opinions were solicited more frequently, whether they were interesting or not.
I think a pound note has got more value than a pound coin.
I prefer the railway logbook. I don't know how they've come with coach this time.
That situation changed with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. Here, the public's emotional reaction became the central focus of the story itself. It started out as shock and sorrow.
The outpouring of emotion just grows by the day. What had begun as a sea of flowers has now turned into an ocean.
Before mutating into anger.
Queen's not in residence today, but where the hell is the flag? Eh? You see what I'm saying about the establishment?
And it eventually altered the events themselves.
This afternoon provided the focal point the crowds had been demanding. Their sudden appearance on the Mall, just one of a series of fast-moving changes in which Buckingham Palace repeatedly bowed to the wishes of the people.
Well, I'm glad she's listened to, obviously, to the media, isn't she, and to the people.
Afterwards, the news was terribly pleased with itself for reflecting the feeling of the nation, for being so wonderfully inclusive, which is odd because the entire saga left me, and I suspect millions of other people like me, feeling weirdly alienated. Because I wasn't an anguished mourner. Diana's death didn't make me happy, but it didn't move me to come down to the palace and demand to see the Queen weeping on the pavement either. Inadvertently, what the news was doing was driving a wedge between regular people and emotional, demonstrative, and some might say overreactive people. And ever since Di's death, it's been this second group that's had more influence over the news agenda. That's why stories such as this angry ITN news piece on the Baby P report often lead on the emotional public outcry.
Baby P's grave is still surrounded by the thought and care he never had in life. No one was there to help you read this card.
In effect, the journalist and the public have swapped places. Instead of offering us a factual summary of events that we can then form an emotional opinion on, they're asking us for our emotional opinion and then incorporating it into their factual summary of events. Anyway, opinions and emotions are one thing, pictures are another. The 2004 tsunami was a decisive moment for user content. Most of these terrifying clips had been gathered by traditional news agencies, which in turn sold them onto TV networks who ran them again and again and again. It was so exciting that the BBC set up a dedicated user-generated content department aimed at harvesting footage directly from the viewers. Shortly afterwards, 7/7 happened and harrowing pictures sent in by those caught up in the attacks quickly made it directly onto the screen. People shot hours of footage. Now, of course, I can completely understand why you'd want to look through a viewfinder if you found yourself caught up in the middle of something like this. Seeing it all through a lens would somehow disconnect you from the misery of what was happening and make it seem less real. At least that's why I do it whenever I get caught up in a bloody argument in a bloody relationship.
You're doing absolutely nothing. I mean, do you even care about me? Have you ever loved me?
A few months after 7/7, another citizen journalism spectacular occurred as the Buncefield oil depot went up like an exploding oil depot.
Minutes after the first explosions, two young men took a video camera to within 50 metres of the fires. They defied official advice to keep away.
Yes, helpfully illustrating one of the potential pitfalls of citizen journalism, two amateur filmmakers raced towards the inferno with their lenses on. Aside from recklessly dumb visual observation, we also got to enjoy recklessly dumb vocal observation. As one of them said, it wasn't a fire, but actually Satan coming to Earth in the form of oil.
It is actually Satan coming to Earth in the form of oil.
See?
Imagine we were sitting right here when it went, and it did that to those buildings.
Yeah, I imagine we'd be dead.
Yeah, well, good job there aren't any oil tanks left to explode, yeah?
At one point, their camera zooms in on an oil tank yet to explode.
Well, this should be good. I hope they stick around.
We've got to make a move now because they're expecting another explosion. If there is another explosion, we're going to die.
Oh, come back. I was enjoying that, you chickie.
Their pictures are another example of the growing public involvement in the recording of major news events. They knew it was dangerous, but say their filming instincts took over from personal fear.
Still, at least the Buncefield footage was spectacular because it was a massive explosion and not, say, a bit of snow. Now, about 20 years ago, the news used to cover heavy snowfall like this. Moira Stewart, dressed in a straitjacket, barking a load of basic information about which trains weren't running.
And services to Sheffield and Newcastle are also disrupted.
And a few sternly voiced VT reports telling you what to do.
Emergency services have repeated their advice for people to stay inside, wrap up warm and not to venture out unless it's absolutely necessary.
Fast forward to earlier this year and a cold snap has suddenly become a chance to turn the news into a cuddly-wuddly multimedia slideshow. Eventually, the sheer amount of user-generated content they'd received became a self-congratulatory story in itself.
35,000 pictures the BBC yesterday received of the weather, an absolutely amazing response, our biggest ever response.
Well, who'd have thought a national weather condition would have generated that many pictures?
35,000 in one day, we just couldn't believe it.
How do you wade through all those pictures like that?
Yeah, how and why?
I think these pictures we're just looking at now, I mean, they're beautifully shot.
Still, it was fun to hear Bill Turnbull getting a bit Alan Partridge about some of the more jackassy clips.
Look at that, look at that.
That is dangerous. That really I would not recommend at all. It's probably illegal and it's not something to do.
I don't know, maybe I'm mean-spirited, but when I see all these zany photos sent in by zany members of the public, I just want to run out into the street and start kicking people in the neck. Your snowman pictures, don't send them into the news. You know why? Because they're not news, they're snowman pictures. If the snowman's learned to talk or he's hanging Saddam Hussein, that's news. This is what news looks like, and this is what a snowman looks like. Can you see the difference? You know what? Paxman agrees with me.
In the meantime, it's all available again on the website, along with our editor's pathetic pleas for you to send some of us your old bits of home movie and the like, so we can become the BBC's version of Animals Do the Funniest Things. Good night.